All right. Hi, everyone. This is CTAC Cheyenne Community Technology Advisory Council. And today we've got Cortney Thompson from Lunavi, the CTO at Lunavi, here with us. We've also got Caitlin Russ, our CTAC member, and Michael Rudolph. I'm Matt Fields, the president of the CTAC, and we're here to talk with Cortney about data centers and Wyoming. And we wanted to kind of delve into, as data centers are coming into Wyoming more and more. We have Meta, we have Microsoft, we've got Lunavi, and we've got some other ones coming and evaluating coming to Wyoming. So we wanted to kind of evaluate the economic impact, the impact on communities, and how those will ultimately help or may cause long-term issues that we may not see, but ultimately wanted to kind of evaluate what is the fit and what is the future for Wyoming and data centers. So real quick, Cortney, if you want to give an introduction of yourself. Oh, we did have Dan McIntosh, another CTAC member, just join. Hi, Dan.
Hey there.
And then Cortney, if you want to go ahead and give that introduction, and then we can kind of jump into some questions and go from there.
Yeah, afternoon, guys. I appreciate Matt, Michael, and Kate and Dan for having me on here today and giving me the opportunity to answer questions and talk about what we're up to here. So I'm the Chief Information Officer here at Lunavi, one of the co-founders, so I've been doing it since the beginning on that perspective. We started the company about 18 years ago in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and have just been continuing to grow and evolve it ever since. And so definitely have a lot of background in the data center industry, as well as Cheyenne and the Wyoming ecosystem on that side.
Okay, very, very cool. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about Lunavi. I know you guys have the data center, or at least one or two data centers here in Cheyenne. Can you tell us a bit more about Lunavi, what its footprint is?
Yeah, definitely. You know, we started out here in Cheyenne with a single facility, about 1 megawatt, really bootstrapping the company, growing it from the ground up on that side. We're able to then build a second facility at about 5 megawatts here in Cheyenne as well. And then across the years here, we've been able to work through acquiring and building out data centers in Washington State and in Georgia as well on that side. So we have basically a full east to west kind of presence on that perspective for our data center and our cloud hosting platform. You know, over the years, we really evolved, I guess, into a value-driven, you know, IT service provider on that side, whether it's consulting, managed services, you know, agile software development. But I know we're here to really just talk about the data center footprint and focus pretty much holistically on that side today. But really our core mission and premise in life is to make sure we're partnering with organizations to make them more efficient through using modern technology and however that fits into their business and really drives value for them.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And thank you guys for starting this in Wyoming. We appreciate that. Workforce is a huge benefit in Wyoming. The people that can work at Lunavi. I know there's a lot of people I've met at Lunavi that work here locally in Cheyenne and other locations. But we also appreciate you guys are kind of the OGs from the data center perspective coming in, whether you guys are Dish Networks. And really appreciate that being built and keeping that in Wyoming. So Caitlin and Michael, as we're kind of getting this in, Dan, as we're getting into this, we wanted to look at the economic impact of the workforce and things like that. Maybe we could have, do you guys have any questions for Cortney related to workforce or things that would be around that you may have heard from others or may have some thoughts on that?
Sure. Hi, I'm Caitlin Russ. Nice to meet you. I'm a local computer science teacher here in Cheyenne. And so I guess I am always looking at this from the perspective of my students and how I can best prepare them for jobs in the field. So I guess, do you have any thoughts or recommendations on skills, certifications, things that I could bring back to my students to kind of help prepare them for their careers?
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of interesting because today everybody's talking about AI, right? And so, it's AI everything, AI in my dishwasher, AI in my toaster, AI in my shoes. And really, what that means is we're just collecting a lot more information and processing it on that side. And that's where like the data center and some of the scale conversations come from. But from somebody coming up in the industry right now, I'd really say kind of, focusing on, what's driving you. The physical data center perspective, is electricity, HVAC, structured cabling, things of those natures, right? And then there's developing inside of the data center. So then you've got the, compute infrastructure, the GPUs, the things that are inside on that, as well as application development and other, avenues on top of that to really build the business and kind of future state of technology as AI develops on that side. And so, I'd say really, think about where your interests are, what's going to drive you, where your passions are, and then focus into maybe those key areas. And then you can look through the different certification or training paths that would go with that. There's a lot of on-the-job training available through the data center industry today, because we know that there's kind of that workforce labor problem, not enough people to actually get the data centers up and running in the time we need them to be online. And so there's a big push there. And then, AI is relatively new to everyone, right? We're all experiencing history at a little bit of extent ourselves. And so, staying abreast of that and the new training that comes out around that and how to push themselves in those directions would be the other side of that. You're seeing a definite push for more specialized training, I would say, this day and age, maybe less into the strategic 4-year or longer term commitment on those sides, and really looking at specialized training or trade school style things on that side.
I know at the at LCCC, Laramie County Community College here in Cheyenne, I know there's been a huge effort. One of the leads of the computing area, Troy Amick over there, has been pushing a very heavy and actually a very rapid program, and has successfully, a lot of his students are ending up into the data center groups, whether it's Microsoft or the upcoming Meta or even some of the smaller places around. And something that I hear a lot about in Wyoming is the brain drain. We get people, we educate them, send them through the university even, and then they go somewhere else because we don't have jobs that are here in Wyoming. And I look at it, and it is a very serious issue, especially you get out of Cheyenne. Or here in Cheyenne, we at least have the Front Range in Colorado, Fort Collins, and a few other places that are nearby that have some amenities that are really nice. Whether it's the arts or shopping or anything else that really helps things out. But in a lot of other places in Wyoming, our smaller towns, we don't have anything that really attracts or keeps talent, unless you can do remote work and someone's really fascinated with that. But how has Lunavi been successful at attracting talent and keeping the talent here in Cheyenne? Because I was talking with Michael the other day, and there's a lot of really talented people out there. And when you look at what Lunavi does, whether from the private clouds or any sort of acceleration or building businesses, helping them to move forward, there's a lot of talent involved in all that. So how does Lunavi work with that, and how are you guys kind of keeping them here, or do you have to end up supplementing it with like remote work and things like that?
I'd say it's a combined effort, really. We've partnered with LCCC and the University of Wyoming to really make sure that our jobs are positioned, for the people coming out of those entities on that side. And so we, do close collaboration with those programs, and Troy and those guys have done a great job out there of really pushing more modern classes on that side to arm the workforce to be ready. Everybody's got that inflection point of, do I stay or do I go when they get out of school on that side? Our hope was always to give them the option to stay here, right? And so that, whether that's physical data center footprint, and then that's what they want to be doing, if it's application development or more of a modern AI, we both offer local employment as well as remote on that side. So, we've got roughly about 110, 115 employees, depending on the day. And, I'd say, between about 25 and 40 of them are either in the office or in Wyoming on that side. So, we really promote being here and giving people the opportunity to either, come back and relocate on that side or as well as stay here. The other thing we're seeing is with the ecosystem developing, there's kind of a halo effect going on where, people are relocating to service these new construction jobs while they're bringing their family with them. So we see a lot of, spouses or significant others on that side that are also needing to be employed as their partner moves into the area on that side. And so I think it's been a repatronation of employees from that perspective. And remote work obviously opens up quite a bit of avenue on that side. So, if I really want to be in Wyoming and I love the environment and everything about it, I don't have to relocate to go do an AI workload job. I can do it right here at Lunavi.
That's good. If you guys have someone like that's interested in working for Lunavi, do you guys ever have like requirements that they be in Wyoming or near Wyoming or be available? I know specific jobs you have to be here physically to do the job, but do you guys ever look towards that?
We promote it, so we'll offer relocation packages. We kind of market here first, I would say, on that side. So we promote Wyoming on there, but it is not a requirement from that perspective. The only jobs that require to be physically in Wyoming would be those data center jobs where you actually have to physically be here to work on equipment or take an on-call rotation, for example.
Yeah. Now, when you guys typically hire for these jobs, are you guys looking at bringing people in, or do you guys like to train up within Lunavi as a general principle?
Great question. We love to promote from within, right? And so part of our mantra is really just progression, continual development, an ever learning mindset on that side. And so, we love to bring people in, train them, show them how things work, and then develop them on their resource and on their technical journey on that perspective. But some of the specialist jobs do require us to source, from basically anywhere in the world that we can find the talent on that side. So every propensity to promote from within, but definitely not shy about bringing people in as needed.
Okay. That's great.
Got a question to add to that, Cortney, is so as you're done this great work building this huge team here, 100 people in Lunavi, how can and how has the government, either locally or state, been supportive of that growth?
No, it's great. I mean, that's some of the reason we chose to start in Wyoming were around the data center initiatives as they got launched from the state on that side. And so we have a history of both helping them develop those programs as well as partaking in them. But, I'd say Wyoming has a very business friendly environment on that side. I mean, Betsy and team with Leeds do a great job out there, as well as Mayor Collins and the city with recruiting and retaining data centers and pushing for these, modern services to continue to grow the state on that side. And so, I think the incentives were helpful and awesome, but really the ecosystem and the ability to do business in the state and the promotion of data centers and technology is really what's driven us to continue to be here.
That's good. The standpoint of, the incentives, a lot of data centers are coming here both because of our low humidity in the state, but they're also looking at the incentives, whether it's taxes or it could be water usage or it could be other things. From that standpoint, you guys got some of the incentives when they first kicked off, and I believe you continue to get a few of the incentives. What happens when those incentives dry up or when they're no longer available? And I guess that's the question is does Lunavi still get some of the benefits from those initial incentives, or?
Yeah, no, it's been a great program, right? I kind of look at it as like the spark that starts the fire, right? The initiatives are really what drew interest, it just helped us, kind of bootstrap the company and get things moving. But we're making 10, 20, 30-year investments in the state, right? And so those incentives are available for a short amount of time in the beginning, but we no longer are eligible for them or take advantage of them. Our customers can take advantage of some of the continued sales tax incentives that the legislature has in place on that perspective. but we don't actually, get any substitution from the state or anything from that perspective on that side. And so it's really, I think they, use that as the tool to promote, and now they're really kind of reaping the benefit of having those programs in play for the next 30 years.
Yeah. Okay.
One thing I would add to that, Matt, just really
Okay.
quickly is, I do hear, the tax abatements and incentives and things on that nature. And I think I would comment that while it's a great tool, to use to recruit and bring people in, it's not really unique anymore for the state of Wyoming, right? There's 30 plus states that have these incentives now. So I kind of consider them table stakes from that. You have to have them to check the box, but they're not what's driving people to really decide on Wyoming at this point. They're just a nice to have and a check the box on that side.
Yeah. What do you think is driving it then?
You touched on it a little bit. Our nice, dry, cool environment allows us to open a lot of possibilities from a cooling aspect. And if you think about data center, as the stool, right, you've got to have square footage. We have land, right? You have to have power. We've got a long history of generating power, and then now hopefully being able to consume it right here in Wyoming without having to transmit. And then, we have the nice, dry, cool ambient air, which allows us specifically to do adiabatic cooling, which basically means we're using quote unquote free cooling, 9 to 10 months of the year, where in another, geo or region in the US, you'd probably have to be cooling 365 days a year for some of these facilities. So I think that there's a combination of that, as well as, the business environment and, what the state has done there to continue to retain this on that side and invest and make the things happen that need to on that side. For example, Black Hills really came to the table with their large power consumer tariffs, for example. And so, the ability for us to, have that in play, receive these facilities without increasing the electrical costs to the actual citizens of the state, I think was paramount in landing a lot of these large contracts.
Yeah. I think the build out of the electrical lines and transmission, it's a long-term bet, right? Because they're putting a ton of money into building those out, and the hope is that the data centers continue here for the long term and actually expand. Because I know there's been there's one facility they were talking about that's like up to 1.8 gigawatts, and people are talking about the massive build out that would accommodate that, because that would be more usage of power when it reaches that than the entire state otherwise. And the co-ops that we have, Black Hills Power, the transmission companies, everyone's ultimately taking somewhat of a relative good amount of risk building that out and planning that it's going to be a 30-year lifespan or something like that. And what do you think the longevity of this is? Do you think this is going to continue into the future, or is this going to be potentially like another boom bust thing that hits Wyoming?
I think the opportunity is real, and we have to capture it, right? And so, you've got a heavily regulated industry like a power producer that can't go to the commission and ask for X amount of investment without passing that along to their consumers. And so you've got to get intuitive and imaginative on how we capture this, right? And so I don't think the utilities can keep up with the power demand that will be required to keep this pace going. And what that means is we are going to have to get creative as a state on how we want to solve, the ability for companies to do on-site generation and not become a power producer, and to service some of their needs, immediately and internally without having to build out the transmission systems, the power generation systems that would be required to take that from state to state or long haul, which require much more of an investment at the utility level than I think they're ready for or are capable of doing. And so you're definitely going to start seeing some traction on maybe looking at modifying some of the legal requirements or changing some of the laws around power production, which would allow for things like small modular reactor or natural gas on-site generation, like you're seeing with Tallgrass and Crusoe on that side. And that's where those microgrids will probably play out a little bit more, in my opinion, to help keep this pace moving. And if we can solve those problems, I think that the sky's the limit for Wyoming because we have the rest of the legs of the stool available.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even building out near premise power is going to be a boon, whether it's the electrical or it's the plumbing or anyone else that's going to be involved in actually building the units and maintaining them long term. So there's some jobs there too. But beyond that, we look at like what Meta's doing right now, and in Cheyenne, there's a massive amount of contractors here, local, out of state, and others that are just here just to work on and getting that built. But so many times in Wyoming's history, we've gone through these massive build outs, and then an industry changes slightly, and we are left with the remnants of so many small towns in Wyoming. We have ghost towns around that are the remnants of these previous bust and boom type things. And I guess when you look at the data center market and power opportunities for building, expansion, employment, and everything else, it looks really good on paper. They're coming here, they're operating here. We have the people running here and living here. But how long do you see this continuing? There's talks of an AI, bubble that are happening. There's talks of over provisioning data centers, and there's a potential future collapse of those, or at least reduced utilization of them. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it does require navigation, right? There's all kinds of talk about the AI bubble out there. The thing you'll also notice is the history of technology is, it decreases dramatically. Once you've proven the concept, the cost of training a model in 2020 is 93% less in 2025, right? And so the technologies will continue to evolve and bring those power requirements back in line. What I'm liking seeing is these companies that are building out in that modular fashion where they're saying, hey, I'm going to bring a gigawatt, maybe 2 gigawatts online, but the facility is intended for 10. So if it does materialize, they can continue to grow and expand. But if it doesn't, they're not left with this large, huge looming infrastructure that, has risk of abandonment or non-use or, just eyesore from an aesthetics perspective on that side. And so I think everybody's hedging their bets a little bit in the industry, but you're hearing comments from Meta like the only thing that we could do incorrectly is not spend enough money on AI right now, right? And so when people make statements like that, you got to be a little cautious of, kind of where those things are going to go, how it's going to materialize. And, the thing I would add on that is, AI is accelerating at about a 75% scale, where only 25% of that is being materialized by us humans, right? So while it's growing at a 75% pace, we are only able to keep up and make business value out of that at about a 25% clip. So the hype will fade. The hype cycle is always real when new technology comes out. There's this large upfront push, and then there's going to be the trough of reality, and everything's come back into it. But it will level out, and the people that are there to really capture that workload and service it long term, I think are going to be the winners.
Well, I agree that there's going to be a lot of changes coming with that, and it's not going to go away. Ultimately, every time that there is a bubble, it always builds something major that wouldn't have been built otherwise. You look back to in the 1800s, we had the railroads. They overbuilt the railroads. It didn't prove to be as much as they thought, kind of a collapse, but we still got the railroads, which gave us very, very important, east, west, north, south traffic and interconnecting the entirety of the United States. I'll refer to Wyoming in the .com boom. In the early 2000s, we had tons and tons of fiber because everything was going to be internet this, internet that. And so we got major fiber through Interstate 80, through Interstate 90, we have fiber north, south, east, west, which is great because when these data centers come in, one of the big uses is they need that infrastructure. They need the fiber to be able to handle the redundancy that they need and also the connectivity. So that infrastructure boom, while it was a 20-year or so wait, it's now being utilized by all these data centers that are out there, which is great. And I look at the AI boom, and I think it's just a precursor to something much larger, an expansion in the future. But right now, it is building out, and it is creating a lot of interest and excitement and thoughts. It's kind of the start of an innovation era, because I think the stuff that we see in Star Wars might actually come to be eventually, but it looks kind of cool, right?
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, it's like I try to explain AI to a lot of people. I say, well, it's like trying to explain the internet to my parents back in the day when I was in high school. It's just a great thing. It's going to change the world, and they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. And now we're kind of like nobody can even think about existing without the internet and connectivity and being able to ask Google whatever they need on that side. When the hype cycle fades, AI is going to be one of those fundamental technologies which really changes the livelihood of us, and what we can accomplish and do over time. And when applied correctly is going to be a game changer on that perspective. So there will be the cycle. There will be a little bit of a boom and a bust perspective on that side. When the dust settles, though, again, hopefully Wyoming's in that good posture to capture, what's truly there and needs to grow afterwards.
Yeah, I agree. So we have Cheyenne as kind of the center of the data center boom in Wyoming. What do other smaller towns? What could they do, or what would be beneficial in those areas from a data center perspective? And as someone who's built a data center from the ground up and works with many of these, what would be, or what could those communities do to be attractive to someone like you?
Yeah, definitely. I kind of harken back to a conversation I had with Randy Bruns a long time ago when we were first starting out, and he was the lead over at Cheyenne Leads. And he said, Microsoft showed up to town and we showed him this empty field. And they said, imagine the possibilities, and it's going to be great when you get here, and this and that. And they said, well, this isn't shovel ready. Then what are we doing here? They rolled up the window and they drove off. We built a business park. We put in the roads, we put in the infrastructure for water, we put in the infrastructure for the power distribution, and they came back 3 years later, and then they signed a deal, right? And so I think it's, getting ready and getting postured for those companies and facilitating everything we can as a community to be ready. So having shovel-ready sites, having the ability to service the infrastructure that they need, having the communication lines in place and the things that are really the bones of what's needed to build the data centers and connect them to the world are requirements for smaller communities. I was recently talking to, just a micro example, the mayor of Shoshone, where I was an alumni on that side. And so we were just talking back and forth about what they could do to facilitate a data center in that area, just as a kind of a North Star. And it was around the same, thing, right? You got to have access to people, you got to have access to power, you have to have access to water. And, started ticking a few of those boxes where it became viable for them to do a study to see if that's something they could even do. Some of where we run into problems is that unless the power companies are going to come up with innovative ways like the tariffs that Black Hills put in play to facilitate and service those large loads, it's going to be hard for them to recruit, I think, at an extent, because they're going to be asking their communities to back and really pay for the infrastructure needed to put that stuff in place. And that's, just a hard pill to swallow, I think, for a lot of people. That's where you see the pushback, I think, from some data center perspective. The acronym I heard the other day was NIMBY, not in my backyard, right? And so, everybody kind of sees that like, hey, is this really what we want to have in our community? Is this where we want to be? And what are the repercussions of it on that side? And so, we definitely talk through those realities and see those things as they are, and kind of work with our neighbors to say, hey, here's how we did it in Cheyenne. Here's how you could duplicate those efforts throughout the rest of the state.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that companies look for when they come in, though, is they need a workforce. People, if you come into a blank field and there's no one around, there's nothing built out, you really just kind of look at it like, well, this is great, but it's in the middle of nowhere. How do I get people here? How do I keep people here? How do I keep them interested? And, go broaden the scope a bit from data centers to just tech in general. Wyoming's economy, we're mineral based. And, all right, thanks, Dan. It's a mineral based economy. And unfortunately, I don't think that we're going to be able to grow the mineral based economy much more than it is right now. We could maybe burn some more stuff to get more energy or fuel or whatever else, gas or things like that. But realistically, it's not going to grow the economy. However, something that you can do, whether it's in a jungle or in a desert, preferably desert or low humidity, is you can do technology. And when you look at that, it's like, okay, this is great. But if you go anywhere in Wyoming, and you mentioned Shoshone as an example, you go to Shoshone as a data center and you're like, okay, I'm going to bring people into Shoshone. Let's say you got everything else you needed, the shovel ready and everything else, and you bring it in there. What are you going to do to get people to move to Shoshone, Wyoming?
Mm-hmm.
What's there from a perspective of whether it's the education programs for your kids, arts and entertainment, shopping, anything else like that. It's kind of a barren place, right? So you already have people in Wyoming. A lot of Wyoming people are already here, but I don't think a lot of the towns and places have really put a lot of effort into upskilling or being an available workforce. And I think that's something that Wyoming has missed over time. Is we've looked at, hey, let's bring in this industry or that industry, but they get here and they're like, just like Microsoft, where's the shovel-ready ground? It's like, who do we hire? How do we keep them here? And we've had a lot of companies that have just looked and said, we can't do it yet. And we would love to kind of get that built up. So from a technical perspective, STEM, getting people ready, what do you see as like, and I mentioned earlier about LCCC and what they're doing, which is great. But if you could have that same output of students that LCCC is doing anywhere in Wyoming, and maybe even a earlier tie-in, what would that do to enable these tech companies, whether it's a data center or other deep tech or high tech company that's coming in? What do you think might be needed beyond that?
I think we've got an opportunity from a reskilling perspective, right? There's synergies in, mining and then, data center infrastructure perspective, right? You're maintaining diesel generators, large mechanical, you've got, pipe workers, things of that nature that, definitely have an opportunity to reskill and keep people here that are already here that may be, struggling or looking for employment on that side. And then, all of the trades and all of the trade schools have these opportunities to open up these pipelines, and so thinking about those, educational tracks and can I bring somebody on that's a data center technician, or can I bring somebody on that's a Kubernetes specialist, and how do we then tailor those programs to feed the funnel and feed the pipeline, so to speak, on that side. We're also seeing a lot of, people moving into the area. And then to your point, we have to keep them. How do we keep them in those perspectives? It's nice to say, hey, I've got work here, but what do I do when I go home at 5 o'clock? There's got to be other things that, make them not want to drive to Denver and, over the weekend and things of that nature. So definitely have been in talks with the local cities of how do we promote those things? How do you, foster an environment that small businesses can start up and thrive, so you have some of these creature comforts that people are looking for and would make them want to stay and raise a family here in Wyoming.
Yeah. No, it's a good question, and I would love to learn more about ways we can do that. We here in like Laramie County and some other places, we started STEM through like 4-H, starting them at as early as like 9 years old, getting them into STEM and things. And I would love to see more of that growing within the state, because I think if we have the workforce, it becomes more and more attractive as a state. And realistically, we're going to have to bring a economy option up next to the existing mineral-based economy. And I think tech really is our best bet. I think a lot of our youth are quite entrepreneurial. They're smart. They're ready. They're hungry. Honestly, a lot of these places are really hungry. And so whether you start with remote work or anything else, you still have to be very tech savvy. And we talk about, the future of AI. I think there's going to be a ton around people that are going to be tech ready that sense, whether it's AI native or robotics or anything else. It's going to be very, very heavily involved in technology, and going and spending 4 to 6 years at a university, it's going to be not the best option. You need someone that's curious, that starts at a young age and can ultimately get involved with it and stay involved with it for their life. I look at someone, we've got Michael on here. Michael's worked with things like NASA and other places, and Michael, I guess from your perspective, as someone that's coming in from the outside, joining into Wyoming and staying here, your education, how much of it was impacted? How long did it take you to get to the point where you were working with places like NASA? And it didn't just start with going to university and that was it. It was probably a lot more beyond that.
Well, for me, I was actually fortunate. NASA JPL, where I worked, was recruiting at my university, so I kind of got lucky in that regard. I went to one of the few places that were feeder schools for the group. But in general, the earlier you start, the better. I mean, you have to have develop some early skill sets that aren't what you get taught in school. Like I used to volunteer helping take things apart with kids, and we'd sit down with 6 to 10-year-olds and just take apart a toaster. And just the idea that they could do that and that their parents would let them, and they'd see how the parts worked, like it opens up your mind to sort of figuring things out on your own. I think that kind of stuff is really important, which is what you're doing, Matthew, with the 4-H stuff in the state, which is fantastic.
Yeah. So, Michael, what are some of your thoughts on the communities and how you build those out? So I know that community is pretty critical. We just kind of talked about some of that. What are some of your thoughts on how do we make a better community in Wyoming?
Honestly, the best answer I have is what you're already doing, Matthew, with the 4-H stuff. I mean, I'd love to hear Cortney's thoughts on this too, but you have to have a critical mass kind of, and it's hard to just spend money and make it happen. You need the right level of expertise. You need enough of it. You need enough interesting things around to draw people, and you get this thing, virtuous, self-fulfilling prophecy almost. So yeah, when I came to Wyoming, we moved to Cheyenne because that was kind of closer to all the jobs and talent in Denver within Wyoming, but still within Wyoming. So kind of have the best of both worlds there. I wonder if you kind of see that too, being based in Cheyenne, Cortney, or if you have any ideas how to sort of spread that up to the other cities of Wyoming.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would just promote that this doesn't have to be, oodles of money or very formal programs on that side. Like, I mean, just treat it as growth hacking, right? Like, hey, take 4 kids, put them in a room and give them a robot and tell them to figure it out, right? Like, there's like robotics, robotic clubs, STEM, everything around those nature where you can just really get people excited and let their brains really move. And then things will come a little bit more naturally, I think, and develop on that side, once it isn't, something that's so foreign to them on that side. So introducing them to the art of the possible, right? Hey, check out all this stuff that's out there. Take apart the toaster, learn how it works, and then take that and relate it into that job function that you're going to, experience later in life. But those grassroots efforts, I think, of just, people investing in the community to say, hey, I'll start the club. I'll take the initiative to do those things, and how then network those together, right? So there's no reason that you couldn't have a robotics competition in Wyoming that would bring Cheyenne and Sheridan and Riverton and Shoshone and everybody together on that side. I've seen UW do great things with the hackathons, for example, and watching those teams and those kids come together at those and promoting them and funding them with prizes and stuff has been awesome to just watch them and see what actually comes out of those hackathons on that side has been very awesome on that side. So promoting those kind of efforts and then just growing the communities together, working together, finding out what's working, sharing that, I think can be very impactful on that side. And we're small, so it doesn't have to be crazy and it doesn't have to be formal and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money.
Yeah. I know in the state, and I'm going to refer to Caitlin on this, a lot of our STEM programs in the public schools have been cut or reduced as the state is slightly contracting over the last few years. Caitlin, what are you, as a part of Laramie County School District, what are you seeing from the STEM education, and what's the impact on that?
I just want to do a little disclaimer that I'm not representing LCSD1 with my opinions or my experiences.
Okay.
I mean, my experience in the 3 years that I've been teaching computer science here have been positive. A lot of support from the district right now to grow our particular computer science program, develop the classes that we want to develop, offer classes through concurrent enrollment with LCCC. And students are taking advantage of that. And I know just yesterday they started a new trades program in LCSD1 to support more of the trades, right? So students going to trade school and then hopefully, finding jobs here in the community. So overall, I think it's positive, but when I hear my students talk, a lot of them are they're high school students and they're looking ahead to the future, and they want to go see the world, they want to go other places. And so something that really resonated with me during this conversation was providing opportunities for culture, for education here at home, so that people, particularly young people, want to stay and not take their talent to somewhere else.
Yeah. I think Cheyenne and Laramie County, in this area, we have a nice, more money flowing through our economy than other parts of the state. What is
Definitely.
something that, we look at the other school districts around the state and teachers that are interested in teaching STEM, that are pushing that forward, they're still focusing kind of in the workforce. What are some things that they might be able to focus in on, or what are some things that they should be targeting, Cortney, and then also Caitlin, in this area?
You can go first.
Yeah, I mean, again, from my perspective, I'd say look along the supply chain, right? And back to where that interests you. As long as there's avenues to explore in each of those verticals, that's where I think we can really level up, because a lot of times there's not. If you go to LCCC and look at the data center program, it was very tailored to one company for precisely what they needed. But when I looked at the program with the instructor, I was like, this is not data center. This is structured cabling and computing 101. And so trying to help align maybe the industries and those verticals of where things can be trained, and how those programs would then bring people up into a job ready state, I think could be like looked at just a little bit closer. So it's not so generic. Again, I hear data center program and I'm thinking, oh yeah, I've got guys that are coming out to be ready to work on generators and HVAC units and this and that. They're like, well, we can run cable. Not exactly what I was anticipating seeing coming out of those programs. So maybe for the refinement around them in those areas, focus, specialization, you have to have the generalist layer so you kind of understand it all, but then allowing you to level up into certain subject matter expertise and take that and run with it.
Okay. It sounds like there's needs to be more partnership between community colleges, educators, and some of these companies that are within the state, because they're going to attract more of it. It sounds like we really need to partner better and really enable communication far better than we have right now.
Yeah, I would really encourage teachers of any content area to look at their local community and see the businesses that are there, and reach out to those people. I've done that, in the 7 years I've been teaching in Wyoming. I've had numerous guest speakers come in. I've taken my kids on field trips to, the universities, LCCC, a couple of other like local businesses and government facilities. And I think that really helps to show students, what they can do when they grow up, and seeing it and hearing it from someone that's not just a teacher is huge for students.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I guess I want to get into one other piece that some other people have heard around Cheyenne, other places have asked me the question about the data centers. They're coming in, they're bringing a lot of power increase, they're bringing in stuff like that, and then worried about the boom bust. But then they've also talked about things like water issues and reusing water, what is it doing to our water table? And I think reorienting a lot of conversations around the long term, the economic questions, the future of the generation that's coming about, that's something that needs to be focused on. But I guess to kind of address those questions, when you look at Lunavi, you're not, do you currently use water-based cooling during certain times of the year? And what do you know about like the larger companies like Microsoft and Meta, and what is their water usage, and what's that on the practical means? What's the long-term effects of that, you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the data centers traditionally, had a heavier hand in some of those things like water usage, and when you're in a dry, arid climate like us, it becomes more important on that perspective. The good thing that we've seen, or I've seen personally on this side, is the development of the cooling infrastructure, right? And so, the outside ambient air is something we love to take advantage of on that perspective, and that allows us to only use water to do trim cooling, basically 3 months a year, versus the 12 months a year on that side. But we always understand we have to be a good steward of everything we're doing. We were one of the top 10 power consumers in Wyoming, and so we need to make sure we're doing it efficiently, for example, right? The most efficient electron is the one you never use, for kind of thing. So we went to a large extent, as our former name was Greenhouse Data, it was very imperative to us to be very conscious of, how we're consuming electricity, how we're doing our cooling. And we can cool this facility at about a tenth of what it takes to cool other facilities in the United States. And then we can take that, savings and just pass it along to our customers, as well as be that good steward on that side. What you're seeing now with these new AI factories, I mean, again, these things are mind-boggling at scale. I think the Atlanta facility Microsoft just brought online was 1.2 million square feet, about 20 football fields in size, right? And they basically are going to put water into that facility once to begin to commission it, to the tune of like 60 houses, the water usage of about 60 houses a year. And then they're going to have zero cooling loss, water loss over that next 6 years, where traditionally they would have been cycling that water through chilling towers or other technologies. So we as an industry have had to evolve in how we're actually doing, cooling technology, very specifically on that, to make sure we're not wasting things like water. We're not over consuming things like electricity and burning it to do cooling on that side. And we're being innovative in initiatives in these areas to continue to allow for the scale that's needed on that side.
That's actually good to hear. I know there's newer generations that even go waterless in many of the designs, which is good to hear that. Also, I mean, it's less power, less cooling, less water used. But I think people still have a concern that water is being, going to become polluted, is going to be dumped back in, and there's a lot of concerns. I wonder how much of that is actually fringe and how much of that is actually day to day.
Yeah, I mean, from a historical perspective, I don't speak for the entire industry, but I think that there were things like that going on, right? If you look at a traditional, cooling tower, for example, you're adding chemicals, you're doing evaporation, you're dumping a bunch of water down the drain. So for the last 20 years, the industry may have been a little bit more pollutive than it is today. Now it's much more conscious, right? That dual loop system we just described and talked about means basically zero water waste on that versus what they were doing before. So I think what you're seeing is a lot of people saying, well, hey, this is what you've done today, or where you've been, and so our concerns are here. And now the industry is saying, yes, but we've morphed and we've changed. Here's how we're doing this today, and it's a much better stewardship of the utility on that side. And so there's maybe a little bit of give and take of, hey, don't mind what we did before, but hey, here's what we're doing moving forward. Of where people are maybe questioning, is that reality on that side? But again, seeing these new facilities come online and the technologies going into them, I can tell you that those changes are real.
Yeah, that's good to go. Go ahead, Caitlin.
So that's awesome to hear. I'm really happy to hear that. The data centers that we have here in Cheyenne, is it possible for them to retrofit or upgrade their existing facilities to include this dual loop or any other new technologies for water saving?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Microsoft's currently deploying this technology in their facilities today. The new ones are bringing online. As life cycling happens, they'll continue to retrofit those. And from what I've seen of, everybody coming to town now, they're deploying these newer technologies day one, and so, I'm super hopeful that, going forward, we're in a really good spot on that side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is huge.
Yeah, no, I think that helps in terms of where we're going to be at. In terms of the workforce, I guess kind of some final questions. What are some ways that, as we look at these towns and building out, what are some ways or things that would be especially of interest beyond just the workforce to these companies that are coming in? So when you guys chose Atlanta, you chose Cheyenne at one point. What was it that kind of sealed the deal beyond you had the incentives and things like that? What was it that kind of attracted you to establish here?
Mm-hmm. I think each of them have their uniqueness independently on that side. And so like Cheyenne, for example, there was a lot of infrastructure in place, the fiber we talked about, east and west routes with I-25, I-80 on that side, ambient cool temperatures. And then we knew that, being a smaller state in a smaller area, that it'd be a little bit harder to recruit into from those perspectives. But the southeastern region has, some advantages to it on that side. If you look at Atlanta, Georgia, for example, you really have most every creature comfort that you'd want from that perspective, as far as, nightlife and schooling and community, functions and things of that nature on that side. So, I think it's continuing to help these communities make the changes that are needed to promote entrepreneurship. We need more small businesses starting up to provide these services that people are accustomed to. They want to be able to go down and grab a cup of coffee and a scone. If you can't do that on a Tuesday because there's no stores open, that's a problem, right? And so, I think we need to really develop into those areas, allow entrepreneurship to take hold and take effect and build into them, and then, start the flywheel and let it just continue to build motion on that side.
That's great. Yeah, you mentioned the flywheel, an economic flywheel. That's not just one individual thing that comes in and happens. It's a very large amount of things happening at once, different people putting input and coordination being required to get something started. It's like an engine. Doesn't just turn on. It actually has a lot of pieces that have to happen in the process. So no, that's really great advice. Good information too. I would like to ask one thing. So if there are people that have questions about data centers, they have things around like the water usage or other things. Does Lunavi have a department or people that can answer those questions and maybe give feedback on that?
Most definitely. I mean, we talk to people about this all the time. We just did an article with Business Insider, for example, talking through some of these realities of water usage and what Wyoming brings to the table, how we differentiate and all that good jazz. But more than happy to answer any questions. I'd say just ring up on our website. There's a chat with us button, or send an email into our info at. Our marketing team will get a hold of you. We'll answer any questions we have. They'll get you to the right people if you need anything from that perspective. And, we're available to do tours and other things for, as needed on that side. So we try to be as open and transparent as humanly possible and answer any questions people have. And I'll be here for the state and anybody that wants to help, promote.
Good. Caitlin, you have a question?
And freeze myself. I just saw that Dan posted 2 questions in the chat. Do we have time to pose those, or?
Courtney, do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah. I'm trying to find the chat button myself here.
Oh, I can read them to you.
Oh, you got it. Good.
Okay. It says, from your experience, have you seen other states get policy right or really get it wrong? I guess around maybe the power usage or in general.
Yeah, I mean, as much as we still do right, I mean, we're still losing deals. Like we lost a large deal to Georgia Pacific Power, for example, because of their ability to invest in the building of a shell and structure versus just providing the electrical infrastructure. And so, I think there are other areas of the country that have been more aggressive in their ability to service the industry on that side. And then there's others that I think, again, are just kind of stalled in that, we're waiting for somebody to come and break ground and prove the model, and then everyone else will follow, build it, and they will come kind of scenario. And there's not a lot of companies that are in that position that are just going to, land in a certain area, be the anchor, and then kind of come back around and build an ecosystem around them without some motivation or reasoning why on that side. And so you definitely see that in other areas. Some are handcuffed, I should say, where they can't because of legal restrictions or current laws that are in place that have to be passed or cleared before that they can even think about doing some of these things. Power tariffs, for example, or generation and how that would happen. What qualifies you as a power producer, for example. So there's still hurdles to clear, I think, even at our level on that side.
Thank you. And he has one other one that might be a nice kind of summary question also. What should CTAC be helping Cheyenne or the state focus on so we can avoid mistakes and build on proven practices?
I mean, I think education is pretty big, right? So there's a difference between Meta coming to town, building a purpose-built AI facility that's only going to be used for them and their consumers, and someone like Lunavi that's a multi-tenant data center here to basically service any and all customers that are in the need for these services here on that side. And so maybe the difference between purpose-built and multi-tenant, what's the difference between building greenfield and brownfield on those sides, on those perspectives. But then continuing to advocate for, the industry, I think, right, is helping us bring it up in parallel with our existing infrastructure and our capabilities of the state. I think this is just, an add-on and a bolt-on that really helps bring us into the next generation on that side. And it's not as a negative thing. It's, how we position it, how we use it, and, what we do to promote it that I think will be the difference in the.
Thank you.
Okay. Cool. Well, I think we've gone through most of our questions. Michael, do you have anything else?
No.
Okay. Well, very cool. Well, Cortney, we appreciate the time. Like I said, we'll work to get this out here shortly. We appreciate all the information too, and being available if we need to, or anyone else needs to ask questions. So we will go ahead and shut our session down and continue on from there. So thank you again, Cortney. Appreciate it. Michael?
Yeah, thank you guys for having me on today, and always available if you have any questions or any needs.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.